Welcome to the final session of the day for Are You Ready Australia, the future of Indigenous leadership in higher education in Australia. It's a conference developed by POSH, SA and NT and facilitated by Campus Morning Mail and Twig Marketing. I'm Tim Winkler. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we each live and work today, and also pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Now, this session is really fascinating, and it's a great follow-up to the session that we've just gone through. In the last session, there was a number of points made about the challenges in evaluating and measuring community impact. There seems to be a general recognition that there's been some steps forward in evaluating what community impact is, but maybe the answer's not quite there yet. So this is a really interesting look at a case study for the development of strategy for all of Flinders, but with a particular focus on Alice Springs, where we have traditional owners Christy Bloomfield and Tanya Turner. They'll be providing insights on how the process worked with them and from a community perspective. And then also Conference Chair Marie Meredith from POSH, SA and NT, who will tell us a bit about the process that was developed and the progress that's been made in looking at how to involve the community and engage them. So Tanya and Christy, firstly, can you hear us okay? And if so, can you give us some thoughts about how you've engaged with universities in the past in Alice Springs?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. And yeah, we're on board. Look, definitely. I think from me, as a traditional owner of Mbantua, not having a university here in Central Australia has been quite difficult. We've recently had Charles Darwin University, and we haven't had much, campus kind of sites here to be able to get our young ones engaged with university. I guess having, contact now with Flinders University and POSH NTSA, we've been able to build a, partnership and kind of work collaboratively working with our local Aboriginal population here and our next generation. So I think from a traditional owner perspective, this only encourages our young ones to take that next step and thinking about university.
Yeah, building on what Christy said, I guess a huge barrier for Aboriginal people is, like Christy said, the lack of ability to go onto campus and learn. There are, like Chris said, Charles Darwin, Flinders here, but the services are limited or restricted to sort of specific topics. So most of our people, if we want to study more broadly, we either have to do it online, which presents its own barriers, particularly remote people. Learning online is basically not possible at all. Or our young people, or even learners, have to move away and go interstate, off country and away from their support networks to do that higher learning and education.
So Marie, then a question for you. When you were starting to look at developing the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander action plan, health plan, earlier you started that in about February this year, I think. And then why did you think of starting with community?
Look, Tim, I think embarking on a strategic plan for a university is very challenging in its own right. But I think the environment and how we do that strategy, we've really got to take notice that we've just come out of a COVID. Priorities have changed, not just for institutions. It's also, a way to understand how community have, changed their priorities as well. So we really needed to, have that conversation straight up. We understand that, we're in a very, I think, unique and privileged position, but we can't assume that we know what the issues are. So part of embarking on a new strategy was absolutely critical that we engage firstly with community, but it was also incumbent on us to understand who our target audience was and who our stakeholders were. So, starting with community first was the appropriate way to move forward, not just on our strategy, but it's also something that we had worked with for the RAP process. So, consistent with building those community networks, but also making sure that the community know what we're doing as well. So it was a two-way process, but we have to start with community first. That's critical.
Does that take a degree of bravery, though, to say we don't know what a community are thinking, let's go out and talk? Because, the Aboriginal health has been listed as perhaps Australia's #1 research priority for maybe a decade. There's been all the discussion around closing the gap, and then more recently, as some of those things haven't really worked, there's been a question of people saying, well, what next? Where do we go? So is this a sort of a way of putting your hand in the air and saying, this is a new path?
Yes, I think it is, Tim. I think historically we've been very inward looking, and it hasn't really given us a chance to actually have that outward focus. So it is very brave to go first with community, but we're also at a time where we can make those changes, because there has been disturbing of the status quo. The things that normally would work in historically we're not the same. So here was our opportunity to be brave, step out and start to look at and work with community, and I also think it was consistent with the terminology that was constantly being thrown around, like, do we really know what community-led process means? And, what are we actually talking about when we start to, explore issues around co-design? So, it's really about us, leading, but making sure that the community are there as equal partners. I think that was really important as the first step, was to show that, be brave, but also this was about us knowing our place as well in this conversation, and that community are experts in their own solutions. So we need to acknowledge that we're partners in this, but we also need to make space for new authority and new ways of thinking and reframing health in whether it's in Alice Springs or in a remote community. So, very timely. Post, COVID, critically important, because, what do we mean when we say community-led and co-design, and on whose terms as well?
And so with that in mind, I know you said it became obvious pretty quickly that the one-size-fits-all approach, the temptation to produce a one strategy that would solve or address everyone's problems, just wasn't going to work. Pretty soon you had to focus in on, well, we'll go and look at what's going on in Alice Springs. We'll work out what's going on in a few centres, and then talk to those communities specifically.
I think the value of doing localised plans became really evident quickly. We could see that there were some commonalities across what we call the Flinders footprint, but we also value the local autonomy of organisations and communities. So going beyond a one size fits all, we wanted to make sure that there were an understanding of what the local determinants of health were, what the local solutions were to what we would call also new and emerging themes. And so, for instance, what we found in Alice Springs was that there was a very clear focus on youth initiatives and what does it mean to be a young person in Alice Springs, and how do young people in Alice Springs, what their role is, and how they're coming up against the justice system. So health justice become a really critical theme coming out of those consultations. And hence, this is why Tanya and Christy have been really pivotal in those earlier conversations.
And so it's probably that's a great link to ask you, Christy and Tanya, like, why has the youth issue, if you like, the youth opportunity and the youth issue come up for you? And can you tell us a bit more about the work you've been doing in that space?
Yeah, look, I guess for us, as traditional owners in Mbantua, and having grown up here with the support and, the backbone of our families, we've been able to have all of that. Unfortunately, our young people don't have that guidance and support. So that's where we've come in as Onchumpa Consultancy, working with Poach SA and NT, and being able to, guide these kids, but also knowing the connections of all their family groups, which is very important to us, because we're able to say, hey, you kids have come from big family groups and strong backgrounds, and we're able to support them. Let's work together and trying to, build a better support system for these young people. I think, unfortunately, we're at a standstill with having no funding, but we're still trying to be in that space, and with the support of Poach SA and NT, who have encouraged us to, keep doing the great work we're doing, being on panels and being able to talk about, the opportunities that we can provide for these young people.
Yeah, so I guess where we came from is that, it's quite commonly known Alice Springs has some trouble with our youth, and there's a lot of factors that contribute to what's going on in our town with our young people and the young people who are here that are from other communities and other areas. And the conversation that we had as a group was that, we're in the best position to affect change in this space. Having that traditional owners, the backing of the Ratipa, the traditional owner group, of other traditional owners within Mbantua as well, but also that cultural authority and knowledge to talk to these kids and to talk to these families on a level that government and youth groups and other workers can't do, because they don't hold that cultural authority over Aboriginal people. And so we came together and said, we're the best people to get out and try something and to do something. And so we started our mission, I guess, to get support to do these things. And along the way, obviously, we crossed paths with yourselves and Marie and Poach, and started having the conversations like Marie mentioned, that crossover, because we come from a legal background, Christy and myself, and that huge crossover from that health justice perspective, even working in the legal sector, that concept of health justice is quite common now, because the things which affect people in the health sector are very much the same as what affects people's chances of ending up in the justice system as well, and working together across those two spaces for the overall sort of changing of people's lives and the direction of our people.
I think that's a really great point that you make there, Tanya, because I think it's really important that we start to take a multidisciplinary approach to our research. And so, the attraction that Poach SA had, with yourselves is that you did come from a legal background, but we also saw that health needed a different perspective or a different lens. So in terms of, you know, when we were looking at what we call our partnerships, you know, there were three things that stood out to us very clearly. And that was that you were already doing good work, right? You're established in the community, you're traditional owners, you have the cultural leadership. So from our point of view, and when we look at partnerships, we want to support those organisations and people that are already doing the good work. And then secondly, it was about us as equal partners. And for ourselves, we could see that we could bring the research expertise. And then from your perspective, you brought the cultural knowledge as well. So that marrying and the ability to go across the disciplines was very much part of what has driven our approach as well, Tim. So, you know, in terms of the community priority and the community impact, these are the sorts of things that we're looking for in terms of making, you know, community impact. But also making sure that we're doing this from a community up approach, you know.
So if you've identified that Tanya and Christy are doing some great work already, that there's opportunities for university to contribute in terms of research and evaluation, that there are other opportunities along the way, how do you then start to look towards success and measuring success? So I assume that, you know, with any good plan, you've got to know where you want to end up before you start out. Where are you? How do you start measuring success that's going to matter to the community and to the university?
Yeah, well, I think it was very clear from the example with, you know, the youth and the health justice is that, you know, what does change mean here? How do we know that we're making change and impact? So, you know, is it the ability to, you know, create employment as part of the project or as part of the research? So that becomes a real indicator for us. How can we grow the project, bringing, you know, elders in and youth? So, you know, looking at the employment of generations become a key consideration as well. Can it enable the practice of culture? So, you know, some of the work that Tanya and Christy have been doing is taking, you know, youth out on country. So, you know, this is a good indicator of what success is. You know, how can we make sure that our youth are culturally strong, you know? So culture becomes a really, really critical indicator. Also, you know, can the project in the partnership, can that be, you know, enable the you know, language and ceremony, can that be brought in as part of, you know, uplifting the project and making sure that it's sustainable, but it's also delivering something for those young people. So these are the sorts of indicators that need to be able to, you know, look at in terms of impact, and how do we actually then measure that, you know, from a researcher's point of view. But again, I think there's also something to be said about, you know, the value proposition from Aboriginal organisations like startups like Tanya and Kirsty's. So it's a new model as well. So here the university is faced with working with new organisations, but we also know that this is it's not a business, it's not an ACCHO, but it's also an emerging, you know, social enterprise as well. So there's a number of kind of intersection, you know, issues that we need to be aware of.
And so, Marie, from I think you've explained a number of ways to measure it from the community point of view, which is really important. How do you sell that within the university in a place where success is often measured in terms of number of publications or you know, grants?
I think we are very much in a space that it's new, okay, and I think this is where plans and strategies do become important, to be able to articulate the linkages and where research overlaps with education. So, you know, these plans are important to show where the local priorities are, but where it actually can be articulated and crosses over with the kind of wider business of the university. So on one hand, the strategies become a roadmap for universities and academic staff to commit, firstly, but then also to be accountable. And that's accountable internally, but it's also about accountability and transparency to the community as well. So those plans become important, especially when community priorities are actually in the localised plans. So it provides, you know, two things: accountability inside, but accountability outside as well. So these new plans are a way to, you know, complement the work that we're already doing within, you know, the RAP space as well.
I'm assuming also that having community buy-in means greater chances of getting grants.
Well, I mean, with any research, and I know from past experience, we need to partner in with our Aboriginal organisations. That's so critical. We also need to know that our Aboriginal organisations are in a position to lead these grants as well. And I think this is a new and exciting space where some of our Aboriginal organisations are, you know, new in establishing their own research agendas. So, you know, for us that sit in the institutions and in academia, we often face with the question of what our role is. So are we, you know, enabler and the provider of capacity building? Do we need to be, you know, step back and let, you know, community organisations lead? But how do we do that in a way that it's sustainable? So constantly we're faced with, you know, these questions of what our role is in the space, in trying to get projects up, to get grants, but also to be you know, accountable. And it's a double-edged sword as well. So, you know, it takes years to be able to understand the process of getting projects up and seeing them through to fruition, to the point where organisations and Aboriginal people are actually leading them. And so, you know, universities are constantly trying to understand that role, how far we go forward, and when do we need to step back.
Tanya and Christy, what does this look like from you know, from, if you like, outside in perspective? I know you're doing more now with Flinders, but with your community hats on, what does this look like from the outside? Is it heading in the right direction? What does it mean to the you in the community context?
I think that any partnerships are great to support, because, you know, speaking from a small business, you know, we're not a big Aboriginal organisation that has access to, you know, funds and things like that. From a small business perspective that's out there doing the more grassroots on the ground work, partnerships are a perfect support to help us to access things and information, services and other things for the people that we're helping that we would otherwise not be able to get access to or information on. And, you know, like I think Marie alluded to before, it breaks down this working in silos. You know, the community has to work together if we're to get anywhere on any of these issues. And, you know, small businesses, organisations, universities all have something to offer within the space. And, you know, it's sort of linking us all in, sort of like a spider web kind of thing, to each other, to have those supports. You know, even just this week, we just started at Flinders in roles. you know, just being here this week alone, we've already made connections with some of the staff here on stuff that they're saying, oh, look, you know, Flinders could support to do these things with the youth stuff that you know, that everyone knows that we're doing outside of this space as well. So it just creates this real network to get things done.
And I think also, look, you know, like Tanya said, from a small business perspective, you know, for us to state that we're working in partnership with Poach, you know, it's amazing that people are like, oh, wow, you are really doing stuff, you know, and we have the support of Flinders, like Tanya said, with other staff here that are encouraging us. And, you know, we love that collaboration work and teamwork and partnership, you know. So I think for us, you know, knowing all the services that we can tap into, but also them knowing what we're able to do as traditional owners and have that cultural authority to do this work that we're doing. So
yeah, that's a great great model. I know you've talked before that there have been for many years, you know, more than 100, is it, services working on youth programs just in Alice Springs, but often in isolation. So is this part of a trend that you would see as a positive thing, you know, trying to work together, build networks?
I guess for us, you know, having worked in, you know, the legal service for many years and knowing all the different other services that all our family members are attached to, we know the services that are there and we know the services that they should be providing for our young people. It's just a matter of being able to state that we're our own company and we don't have to follow certain guidelines. We don't have to worry about who's funding us and is that in our funding budget. We're able to state that we can assist if we get that funding. You know, we can do that. We can do this. And we know the organisations and services that we can tap into. So I think that that's where we're different in that way, that we're able to, take advantage of all those services and organisations as well.
What would you like to see in terms of, so there's been this process to develop a plan that it's been based in listening to the community and then having some measures. What would you like to see happen in 3 years' time in terms of the outcomes of that work, the outcomes of the plan? What, from a community point of view, what should that look like? What would you like to see as impact?
I think Tanya said it best when we did the panel, you know. It's okay for other organisations, it's okay for non-Aboriginal government organisations to let go, you know, and let us do the work that we know we can do. You take risk and do that because, you know, well, we were doing it before all of these other organisations and we were well off with our elders that led the way for us. And I think that, you know, give us those opportunities. We're here to do the job and we know what we want to do and we know how to do it. So I think, you know, for us to be able to do that, like Tony has mentioned.
And those, you know, have some embedded programs in the community that are, you know, build on these collaborations and partnerships that service our Aboriginal young people in the way that we know they need to be serviced. And, you know, going back to the conversation earlier about targets or, you know, how you measure these things. And I think, you know, their engagement in the community is a measure. You know, if we have young people going to school, playing sport, you know, not all children are going to be on their best behaviour every single day of the week, you know, we're not going to be, but just to bridge that divide for some of these kids to make them feel a part of our community and have, you know, people like Poach on the sidelines there to help fill those gaps when they arise, have that embedded network of people. But like Christy said, the leadership for those things needs to come from Aboriginal people and particularly traditional owners of Mbantu or Alice Springs who have that cultural authority to run these programs and push them, because we're always going to be here, you know. Our community is very much a fly in, fly out or a transient community. People come from all over, but at the end of the day, we're the people that will be here forever. So it's on us more than anyone to try and help and resolve these issues.
Marie, what's your thoughts on, in terms of, a few years' time, how does it look in terms of success?
Well, I think, for us, the way forward is, acknowledging that there is that authority, and it is about making sure that culture is involved, so we really want to move away from that punitive deficit model. And I think this is where Christy and Tanya are leading the way. This is the new way forward. I also like to think that the succession model is really, really important. So what this partnership does is set up and recognize that, this is actually about generational succession, that these are our new leaders that are coming through. And yes, we do need to invest in our young people. That is absolutely critical. And some of the things that we do talk about in university is growing our own and growing the talent pipeline. Well, we need to be doing that with our community and also with our children, because they are the next leaders, and they will be the ones that will be making decisions. So it's important that we invest in them now. So for me, that would be, an absolute critical indicator of success, is to see that these young children are coming through and being leaders in their own right, and being role models. But also it's about making sure that our elders are looked after as well, because they're also part of the knowledge holders, but they're critical in passing down these lessons to our young people. So we've really got to embrace that. But we're doing similar work within the institution, where we are trying to set up the next generation of leaders. And this is what we're doing at Posh SANT. How do we grow 500 health leaders by 2025? We're dealing with the same issues, and we need to find solutions here.
Christy and Tanya, how does this work in terms of other universities that might, listen to this and think, well, this is great. I know there are already many universities that might not have a bricks and mortar footprint in your area, but they want to come and do research there. What's been your experience, and how can that work better? What would your message be to other universities who also want to collaborate?
Yeah, it's funny actually, because we've probably, since engaging with Poach, we've probably had interactions with maybe 3 other universities, similar, wanting to get into the space and do things. And I suppose wanting to increase their cultural safety as a university, their cultural awareness, and a number of different areas, which is fantastic. And from all disciplines of universities, law, arts, business, which is great. And, I guess any engagement is good engagement, as long as it's a two-way street, sort of like what Marie's talking about. It's as much as about the universities coming here and getting what they need as it is about them giving back to the community at some capacity as well, and what they can do to help Aboriginal people in their particular field. For example, we've had interactions with some business schools, and we've had conversations with them about, okay, well, if you're coming, there's a lot of emerging Aboriginal businesses in our community. What can you offer our businesses? If we do these things for you to help you in your space, what can you do for us to advance us as Aboriginal people and help us achieve our goals as well?
Is it a challenge, retrofitting your priorities into their plans, as opposed to this approach, which is more starting out with finding out your priorities and then building from there?
I mean, I think that they've been quite open, but I do understand what you're saying, Tim. I definitely think the way that we've progressed with Poach has been the best way. Conversations and building it from the ground up, as opposed to sort of, I guess some universities perhaps trying to come in halfway through that point, as opposed to having to do all that groundwork first. So in terms of a model of how to do it, that is definitely a better way of trying to do that work. Yeah.
Do you think there's lessons for other traditional owners as well in other communities in terms of, you know, your experience and what's gone on? Are there other things that could be learned from your experience now that you could share that would be relevant to other communities?
Yeah, I think for us, you know, we would definitely, you know, when, you know, doing a course or a project that we're working on, we would tap into other traditional owners and communities and stuff. So, you know, having come from Central Australia and in Bantua, we kind of know who's connected where and who the traditional owners are. So it would be great, you know, for us to be able to, you know, get them going just as much as we want to be able to succeed as well, because we want to tap into their, you know, their cultural connections to their country just as much as everyone wants to come to in Bantua. So I think for us, we would definitely encourage, you know, our, you know, remote communities and their traditional owners as well to be a part of, you know, whatever we're working on. We want to build each and every one of us.
Is there some sort of scope for, you know, traditional owner groups across the country to get networked to some degree, where the people who are interested in working with universities share ideas and experiences on how to make it work best?
Yeah, definitely.
Would love to be a part of that.
Yeah.
You know,
and especially because different traditional owner groups bring different things to the table and have variations of different issues or successes that to come together, you know, and share those things, and to work with universities in that space, have this sort of pool of traditional owner knowledge and resources would be fantastic.
Well, one thing that has been, you know, already a consistent theme through the conference has been that, you know, every researcher wanting to work in this space needs to, or at least should be, you know, working with community. But it's really interesting to hear back from community to think, well, is everybody equipped to work with universities? Are there challenges? Where do you start? What questions do you ask? You know, all those sorts of issues. Marie, what do you think about that?
Tim, I think there's a lot of, you know, opportunity to be done with, you know, new and emerging organisations such as Christy and Tanya's, but also, you know, there will always be what we call the lone rangers, or you know, the one person that does have a bright idea but doesn't necessarily know how to frame the question, you know. So, you know, we're going to be able to you know, do that capacity building in terms of really understanding exactly what the issue is, how we then frame the question, and then how we actually, you know, design, you know, projects or you know, be able to support new models of working. So I do believe that, you know, the way of the future will be to have a look for those, you know, those voices that are not necessarily there, that are always on the periphery. So looking for new opportunities to bring them in is going to be really, really important. We've got, you know, good and really strong organisations, but it's really those emerging voices and those new emerging businesses that are going to, you know, really help us to understand what innovation is in this space as well. So I think that's what we're really excited for at Post-SANT, is where is that new innovation? Where's that coming from? You know, so where are the next Christine and Tanya's coming from? So, and also, you know, most importantly, it's about making sure that, you know, mob are successful. So how do we actually grow that success, and what does success look like in this space? And so that it becomes not just an individual pursuit, but a collective pursuit. And that's something that we can all celebrate, you know, because it's based on really strong principles.
Would you have any tips out of this process, Marie? And then maybe I'll ask you to the same question, Christy and Tanya. Any tips on how to make universities seem less daunting? Christy and Tanya are juggling many things, and so it can often be hard to engage with the university. Are there any things you've learned through this process, Marie, on, well, this would make the process easier for people to look in?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, and this really aligns with where we're at with the university too, where we want to increase students and staff, you know, just having Aboriginal people visible in the institution is going to make a huge difference. Because, for instance, you know, if you've got someone sitting on the front desk in the Alice Springs Flinders office, that's going to make a huge difference, because someone's going to come through the door and have a conversation. So that's going to make a big difference. You know, these are just small things, but they're really important things. You know, and that's just at an organizational level, you know. But I think if there's more opportunities for the university to become engaged in some of the more critical issues, you know, like we've had this morning, the Voice to Parliament, and then also treaty making, you know, like universities can absolutely have a role. And if they are visible in the space and making sure that initiatives and conversations and dialogues are had, well, that's going to be, you know, better for institutions. And of course, it's all about relationships and how we actually build that trust. And I think that's where we're at, is the conversations about how do we actually build trust? How can our communities trust our institutions, and vice versa, you know?
Awesome. Christy and Tanya, from your perspective, if you had 3 tips to pass on to other people wanting to engage with the university, what would it be?
With Marie, and I guess building on that is community engagement. You know, I know particularly here in Alice and myself, quite honestly, I had no idea what Flinders Uni was doing in Alice Springs until, you know, Auntie Pat linked us up with all of you.
Yeah.
So, you know, kind of builds on what Marie said, you know, having Aboriginal people present, but also taking the university out of the building, you know, being involved in community events, having a face, you know, NAIDOC Week, the show, all those things which our community are involved in, having a face at those things so that it can break down that barrier. Because for, you know, an Aboriginal person in Alice Springs, a university is a thing which is not a part of their lives. You know, it's not something which happens in an Aboriginal person's life generally. It's something that other people do. So if you start integrating yourself into the community in that sense, you've just become another face at those events. And then they start going, oh, Flinders Uni, you know, oh, them mob were there. And you don't become a university anymore. You become part of the community. And that's where you start breaking down those perceptions of, you know, oh, that's something that goes on over there in that building, but we don't really know, that's for doctors. And you know, it breaks down that issue that you have that barrier for people to engage with the universities.
And I think it's, you know, people like yourselves, you know, and Auntie Pat, you know, who we don't say no to. And so, yeah, like Tanya said, being a part of the community, you know, no way would we have thought that would be working for Flinders University, you know, coming from the legal background. But it's amazing, and what we've been able to be a part of and continue to grow here in Central Australia and Alice Springs, definitely. And we're keen to, you know, continue that, because now people will look at us, and knowing us from community, they'll be like, oh, they work at Flinders now, and have that background there. So it's really exciting to see where Poach and Flinders can definitely make a move in Bantama.
Fantastic. Well, that's been a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you to you all. I think we're about at the end of our time. Marie, did you have any comments to close us off?
Look, I think it's really great that, you know, people like Tanya and Christy, you know, we've seen, you know, the conversations grow. You know, we've had the idea, with the youth, you know, and health justice, but within a period of say 8 months, we've seen, you know, you guys grow, you know, you're now coming, you're coming over, you know, and you're also being part of a new wave, I think, a new wave of leadership, you know, in one sense, you're cultural leaders, you come from a background of law, but you're being brave and stepping across into Aboriginal health, which I can absolutely commend, you know. Not a lot of people can make that transition, but you've seemed to have done it really well. My hope is that you continue doing, you know, your core business, you know, like out there with youth on country. Don't ever forget that. That's really important. You'll do the Flinders job, but that's your call. So that for me is, you know, it's wonderful that you're able to balance it. You know, it's a real testament to who you are and as new and emerging leaders. So thank you.
Thanks, Marie.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's been a great session, and we'll look forward to joining everybody again tomorrow when the conference resumes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.